Hello, in this video we're going to practice identifying fallacies. So the first thing you should do is get this slide. It's a file in the unit by itself and you should download it. You'll find it useful. It just lists the three fallacies that we've pointed out. So we have denying the antecedent, which we call bad DA, and that's where we have if P then Q and not P and we infer not Q, invalid inference. We have affirming the consequent, we call that bad AC, and that's where we have if P then Q and Q, and we infer P, again an invalid inference. And finally we have the non sequitur fallacy, which we call bad NS, where we infer from P to an entirely unrelated Q, or maybe we infer to P from P and Q to an entirely unrelated R. Okay, so let's do some examples. So here's an argument. We're going to see if we can derive the argument if P then Q and if R then Q, then if P then R. So we start off as we normally should with our show line if P then R. Because we're trying to show a conditional, we will assume the antecedent with assume CD, and then we'll bring in our premises if P then Q and if R then Q. We then look at 2 and 3 and we apply modus ponens. We then look at 4 and 5 and we apply modus ponens again. We think, aha, I've gotten to the consequent of what I'm trying to show, which is R, and so I can apply CD, and that will let me box and cancel. Okay, so there is a fallacy here. One of these steps is mistaken. We want to identify which one. Where is the fallacy? So, which line do you think it is? Well, it's line 6. Line 6 does not follow by modus ponens from 4 and 5. 4 is if R then Q. And so for modus ponens, we need R, but we have Q instead, so we can't do modus ponens. So which fallacy is this? It might be AC, affirming the consequent. It might be DA, denying the antecedent. Or it might, if it's neither of those, it might still be NS. Well, this is AC. We've affirmed the consequent. We have Q. Q is the consequent of 4, and we've said, aha, yes, this lets us go to the antecedent, and it doesn't. So this would be, if we were doing this on our homework, we'd circle line 6, or say line 6 is the fallacy, is the fallacious application of modus ponens, and this is actually bad AC. So here's our second fallacious, the argument that we're going to do a fallacious derivation of. The premises are if P then Q and if R then Q, and the conclusion is if not R then not P. So we'll start off by showing the conclusion. We then think, okay, what should I do next? Well, if I can, I want to make an assumption, and this is a conditional, so I can make an assumption for a conditional derivation. I'll assume that not R is true. And now my goal is to get to not P, and when I get to not P, I can box and cancel with CD. So we bring in our premises if P then Q and if R then Q. And now we look for inferential applications, and we think, aha, I can do 2, 4 modus tollens, and I can get not Q. Now I have this new line. I want to combine it with my old lines. I've used line 3. No, sorry, I've used line 4, but I haven't used line 3. And if I look at 3 and 5, I think, aha, I can do modus tollens. I can do, and I will get not P. And oh, good. I remember that not P is my goal because that's the consequent of what I'm trying to show, and when I get the consequent of what I'm trying to show, I can box and cancel with conditional derivation. So this is a bad derivation. It involves a fallacy. It has a mistaken justification, one of our lines, so we want to find that line. So which line has a mistaken justification? Well, line 1 doesn't need a justification, so it doesn't have a mistaken justification. Line 2 is a correct assumption. 3 and 4 are, in fact, our premises. Line 7 is a correct application of CD. So it's got to be 5 or 6. 5 or 6 is a mistake. So 6, the justification is 3, 5, MT. So 3 is if P then Q, and 5 is the negation of the consequent of 3, and so that's an okay and not P is the negation of the antecedent, so we're inferring from a conditional and the negation of the consequent to the negation of the antecedent, and that's modus tollens, so the line that's mistaken must be line 5. So why is line 5 mistaken? Well, if it's modus tollens, we need to have a conditional as one premise, and we need the negation of the consequent as the other premise, and we need the negation of the antecedent as the conclusion. So let's look at our premises. They're 2 and 4. So we have a conditional, that's good, but then we have the negation of the antecedent. We need the negation of the consequent, but we have the negation of the antecedent. So we have the wrong premises. We don't have the right premises. Also, the conclusion of modus tollens should be the negation of the antecedent, but the conclusion in this case is the negation of the consequent. So the conclusion is also wrong. So we have the wrong premises, and we have the wrong conclusion. We don't have the negation of the consequent as our second premise, and we don't have the negation of the antecedent as our conclusion. So this is not modus tollens. And that means that also tells us what the fallacy is, namely, it's bad DA denying the antecedent. We're saying the antecedent is false, and so the consequent is also false, but that's not valid. So the fallacious line is line 5. We see it doesn't fall by modus tollens, and then if we compare line 5 and 2, 4, and 5 to our list of fallacies, we see that it fits the bad DA form. So this is denying the antecedent. So to do this, you need, when you're given an derivation, you need to find the line that has a mistaken justification, and then you need to identify which fallacy the mistaken inference is. It might be AC affirming the consequent. We might have one of the premises is a conditional, the other premise is the conditional's consequent, and the conclusion is the conditional's antecedent, and that's AC. Or it might be denying the antecedent. One of the premises is a conditional, the other premise is the negation of the antecedent, and the conclusion is the negation of the consequent. Or it might be non sequitur. It might just not follow. In a way, all fallacies are non sequiturs, but because in all cases the conclusion doesn't follow, it's not a valid rule, but we want to identify the most specific form of the fallacy. So if it's AC, we write AC. If it's DA, we write DA. If it's not either of those, then we write NS. So you'll have some problems like this for your homework on the Canvas site. If you have questions, please let me know.